Salve. Today is going to be a short lesson on basic grammar. This will be especially helpful as a kind of review heading into fall break. We will not study a new chapter this week. Rather, I encourage you to use this opportunity to review basic grammar per today's short video tutorial lesson. Let's take a look at some basic sentences in English and translate them into Latin. And in particular, one of the things we want to get confident in is really the Latin noun declensions. We have spent a fair amount of time this semester focusing on verbs, in particular passive, and also other special usages of cases, in particular the ablative. And the ablative absolute is the grammar concept, or one of them in the most recent chapter. Nevertheless, if we can get a good understanding and command of basic Latin noun declensions, and because you can use a dictionary, which seems sensible as scholars of Latin, you should increase your understanding greatly and have a lot more confidence in reading and even translating Latin. So with that said, I want to kind of go over very simple sentences, the kind of sentences you would see in a modern language, in contrast to a classical language, which tends to be based on classical literary sources. Let's begin with this example right here. The girl greets her mother. We need the vocabulary, of course, and I'm going to put this in italics so you can see here. And so puella greets, salutat, and then matrem. Let's make a couple of points about this. Again, we need to know the vocabulary, but again, you can look that up in a dictionary, and of course our Latin textbook has set vocabulary for each chapter that we'll want to make note of. But with that said, let's take a look at this here. So we have puella salutat matrem. And if I go back to our Latin noun declension chart, girl is the subject, so we put that in the nominative, so puella, hence girl ends in A in Latin because its function is the subject in the sentence. And then mother is the direct object, because whom is she greeting? Well, she's greeting her mother. So we have matrem, M-A-T-R-E-M, and we put the em accusative ending. Now, I have not had you as students, nor have you had me as your teacher thus far. So I assume you talked about this in previous Latin classes, either at Campbell or in your previous schooling. We will need to know, of course, the declension to which a noun belongs. And of course, that can only be learned and memorized by reading and practicing Latin. But also the dictionary will give you the declension to which a noun belongs. So when we look at our dictionary, we should see puella, puellae, because girl is first declension. Remember, it's only the genitive singular that gives us the declension of a noun. Similarly, with mother, it's mater, M-A-T-E-R, and the genitive is matris. So however we use the word mother, it will always have, or mothers, it will always have a third declension ending. Similarly, with girl or girls, it will always have a first declension ending. Let's go back to this example and manipulate the language a little bit. Now, of course, it is very common, although not wrong, to put the verb at the end, but I kept it in a similar word order as in English. Another thing that you'll see is that classical Latin tends not to use possessive adjectives. It is possible grammatically to, if you wanted to put that in there, but again, that's just like stylistically awkward. The context will tell you that it's her mother, based on a larger reading passage. And so we have Puella salutat matrem. Now let's change the example here. And again, for many of you, this is going to be a review, but I think for some of you, this might be a good week to consolidate before we move further in the Wheelock's Latin. So let's take a look at this example. And this time I'm going to say the mother greets greets her daughter. So here we're going to put the mother as so mater, and then we can keep the same verb here. One thing about the verb, I did pull up the Whitaker's words. These are a little bit trickier, but these need to be memorized. These are the so-called principal parts. So if you can say I already have this one up for us here, but so these are the principal parts right here. So saluto, salutare, salutavi, salutatus. At this point, in the Wheelock's Latin, we need to know how to use all four principal parts. I assume, based on your previous Latin, you know how to conjugate. What we do, of course, we drop the ending, but then we put back the key vowel in most cases to make it pronounceable, and then we add the correct ending depending on the tense, number, and so on. So just to give a quick sort of overview of saluto. So saluto means I greet. Salutes with as means you greet. Salutat, as we have in our example, means he or she or it greets. Salutamus means we greet. Salutatis means you all greet. And salutant, T-A-N-T, means they greet. So we're just using our osmos tisnit endings, our O-S-T, M-U-S-T-I-S, and N-T. So if we go back to just basic vocabulary, if we look at this one right here, you can see that puella can mean both girl or daughter or maiden. Only the context will make it clear. As you know, English has a lot of vocabulary compared to other languages because English has been created by Latin and German and other languages, and so the vocabulary tends to be much larger in English. So in this case, we're going to use the same word, but we know it's in this second example, it's referring to daughter just based on the context, or the context that we have invented for examples of illustration. So here we're going to change girl into the accusative. So here we have the mother. As you know, Latin tends not to use definite articles. So the mother greets. Again, we probably would put the verb at the end, but we can keep it here for illustration purposes. And then you can see instead of puella, we have puellam. Why? Because, of course, we need the accusative direct object ending, which is am. So you can see, however we use the word girl, it's going to have one of these endings. Now, in the case of the Wheelock's Latin, one of the challenges is it doesn't focus on people, but ideas, in particular philosophical and literary language, as we'll see in a moment when we take a look at a brief example. But it's the same concept. The only difference, of course, is different vocabulary, but you're still using these declensions or different endings to create the parts of speech or meaning in Latin grammar. So let's take a look at another example. And take it out of, just gotta change that there. There we go. And I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. And this time I'm going to say, if I can type here, the girl, let's see, has a book from her mother. So again, we could change this to receive, but I'm trying to keep it in the present tense just for illustration purposes. So how do we do this in Latin? Well, here you can see we're going to need from her mother, which is going to require the ablative. So I chose this one on purpose because we have had a lot of ablative this semester. So we go back to just knowing vocabulary. So there we go, puella. And book, of course, is liber, with where we get the word library. But just to review, just to show you, these ultimately need to be memorized. And just like anything else, you learn it by practicing. So if I type in liber, you can see it can mean many different things. But we don't want free man, but we want book. But here's the point I want to emphasize is that this is something that if I had been your teacher for Latin 101 and 102, we would have emphasized this, but I just sort of assumed you have it down pat at this point. Hence the purpose of this week's lesson, just to make sure this has indeed been covered with you by a previous teacher and previous classes. So we can see that the genitive singular ending for book is the letter I. So then we go back to our declension chart, which needs to be memorized. There's our genitive singular I with the macron. So however we use the word book, as many of you know, it's going to have to use a second declension ending. As you know, one thing Latin doesn't do, it's not going to use second declension in one example and then use third in another. And these are set pieces, so to speak, that grammarians have put together through the centuries. There's always exceptions, but these are by and large the general rules. So we're going to need librum in this case because the girl has the book. So the book doesn't have her. In that case, if that were the case, which would be nonsensical, that would be liber puellam. But of course, it's the puella, the subject in this case, who has the book. So we're going to have to put the em ending here. How do we do that? We drop the genitive ending, but then we still have to add our regular ending. So if we go back to just how to spell it here, you can see it's L-I-B-R, but then we drop that, but then we add the um ending because we need the accusative direct object ending here. So with that said, we're going to put our answer for librum. Librum. Puella librum. Again, probably would put this at the end, but I'm going to keep it here just for illustration purposes. Now, the tricky part is indeed the ablative. There really is no easy answer, and I say that because that has been one of our themes this semester. The ablative just is going to take trial and error. The big challenge with the ablative, as you know, is oftentimes it's used not just for declensions, but for example, ablative, absolute, and participle phrases. But big challenge for the ablative is often you're missing the words and you have to supply them. So you're going to see that Latin generally is going to use one word, whereas English uses three words. And so we have to sort of invent or come up in our imagination these words in English. Otherwise, we may struggle with how to translate ablative phrases, which in this case is just a prepositional phrase. But we know we need it in the ablative. Well, we go back to our chart here. I'll write the answer here and then we'll explain it. This is going to be ma tre. Why? Because third declension, as you know, third declension ablative singular ends in E. So if we go back to our chart here, you can see ma tre. Now it would be possible to put a a tre. You could put a preposition rather there if you wanted to, but you don't need to, especially in poetic Latin. But it might be common. But if we want to put the ab for from, that's fine too. But when we use ab or ab, we need the ablative. So there is our ablative ending right there. Let's do a couple more examples, and then we'll take a look at one of the shorter reading passages in this chapter. So again, the purpose of this week's lesson is just to review sort of basic declensions. If we can get comfortable with declensions, we should be very, very successful in Latin, especially because you can use a dictionary. Let's give another example. Let's say that let's see, let me change it up a little bit. Let me use a second declension here. So the boy, I can type here, is walking with his dog to school. So there's a good one right here. So the boy is walking with his dog to school. Well, with a dictionary or learning vocabulary, we know that boy is puer. So, and then again, we probably would put the verb at the end, but I'll just put it here. Again, you know this by now, but just to go back and to review basic conjugation of verbs. So if I type in ambulat, I should say, so here we go. So we got verb, present, active, indicative, third person singular, he or she or it. But these are our principal parts. Again, a good dictionary should give you these principal parts. Our book gives them, but they ultimately need to be memorized, or you certainly need to know how to find them. So in this case, ambulo means I walk. But here's the key vowel, A, because this is first conjugation. So ambulo, I walk. Ambules, you walk. Ambulat, he or she or it walks. Ambulamus, we walk. Ambulatis, you all walk. Ambulant, they walk. So there's our osmos tisnit, or our present verb tense endings that need to be memorized. Same thing with the perfect. Here we just add our e, isti, eat, imos, istis, eront for our endings. And again, anytime you have questions about these, feel free to ask. This information is readily available online, but it might be easier to ask me to put it in context of what we're doing. And then, of course, the fourth principal part, this is the supine. We've been dealing a lot with this semester because this forms an important part of participle constructions, which is another kind of tricky topic. But again, the point of this week's lesson is we can get a command of declensions, especially the first three. A lot of the other elements that are take a little bit longer to learn, we should still be able to be quite successful in learning Latin. So if I go back to the example here, again, so we said we'd probably put this at the end, but that's fine. Now, with his dog, Latin is probably going to use cum, but when we use cum, it's always followed by the ablative. How do you know that? Well, you just know, but if not, your dictionary should tell you. If not, you can use, look it up in Whitaker's, for example, and you can see cum is a preposition with the ablative. Again, you can see cum can also be an adverb, but in this context, because the object that follows is in the ablative, as you'll see, and we need a prepositional phrase, we're going to use it in this usage. So being able to interpret these symbols, or abbreviations rather, is probably helpful. So you can see the different possible translations. We're going to keep it simple with. So, but dog is third declension. Why? Because canis. So cane. Why? Because like mother, canis is third declension. That just has to be memorized. So dog will always be third declension. So if we go back to our, once again, you can see cane. So canis, dog. Of the dog, canis. For the dog, cani. I see the dog, canem, or beware of dog, cave canem, that famous phrase. In this case, with the dog. And then to be similar common meanings and translations, but simply in the plural. So we go back to our example here. Now school, there's a couple different options for school that you can use. You'll see that ludus is probably the most common. Let's see, for school. There is scola, but that's more of a medieval Renaissance idea, where we get the word scholastic. So let's just go with this. You can see that it is a neuter noun of the second declension, but when we use odd, you'll see that odd is always required to use the accusative. So again, you can see that these simple examples that we're giving you today really require a firm understanding and mastery of this declensions, because we need to know that ad uses the accusative. How do you know that? Because of your study of Latin, and a dictionary will tell you that as well. But we still need to know, okay, well, here is school of second declension, because we just learned that, or if we don't know it already. So we need ad ludum as our answer. So we go back here, ad ludum. So the boy, again, probably put this at the end. The boy puer ambulant cum cane ad ludum, or if you prefer, puer cum cane ad ludum ambulat. So we could give other examples, but this is about as simple as it gets. But since I haven't had a chance to see you operate in class in person, I can only infer based on the results of the first test that most of you have a firm understanding of this, but some of you, hopefully, this week will allow you to review and to consolidate your understanding of this. Let's take a look at just something from our textbook, and that'll be it for today. Let's see. So this is the chapter. What is this? 2024, and this is what we did last week. But I thought maybe we'll just take a look at some of this language right here. It's a very short, from Phaedrus, very short text. It starts off with a ablative absolute. We mentioned before that last week the ablative absolute almost always is at the beginning of a sentence. Very often it's 2 words, sometimes 3, in this case 4, just because we have the preposition. So notice this is second declension, ablative singular. This is our participle. This is a preposition followed by the accusative. Virtue is third declension. So third declension, accusative singular is em. Hercules, as the text points out on the next page, right down here, is our subject. So literally, after being received into heaven because of virtue. So literally, in heaven, received because of virtue. But we need to put it in somewhat more idiomatic translation. So you have to kind of do trial and error, as we talked about last week, with the different possible ways to translate it. You have to kind of just experiment with it, which is, I think, one of the virtues of Latin, is it allows you to be a little bit creative with your language. So the fact that the main verb is in the past tense, I think we'll just keep it in the past tense too. Plus, remember, participles that are first or second declension should be translated in the past tense. So after he had been received on account of his virtue into heaven, or after he had been received in heaven on account of his virtue, or for the sake of his virtue. Hercules greeted many gods. So this one is kind of similar to the examples we were just doing. Remember, always separate it by the clauses. So we have a comma here. So let's just focus on. So here's our subject. This is our verb. Same verb we just had in our examples here. The only difference, of course, we're using it in the past tense in our wheel locks, whereas here it's in the present tense. And then multos deos, that is second declension accusative plural. So it fits in nicely with what we're doing in terms of some continuity of concept. So there's the multos deos, many gods. So after he had been received into heaven, Hercules greeted many gods. So that one's pretty straightforward. The gods are the direct object. So who greeted whom? Well, he greeted them. So the them is that our accusative direct object. Now it gets a little bit tricky in parts, but Pluto coming, so we have this semicolon here. So you almost have to say is that when, because here we have this idea of seeing, but when he saw Pluto was coming. So, but with Pluto coming, that actually would be the better translation, because notice we have a third declension ablative ending. And we said before that participles, present participles in the third declension should be translated using the present tense or ing. So we've talked about that before. So probably with, use the preposition with. But with Pluto coming, who is the son of fortune. So who is the son of fortune? So notice of fortune, if you look at the declension chart, that's first declension genitive singular. Turned away his eyes. So here is referring back to Hercules. But with Pluto coming, who is the son of fortune, he turned away his eyes. So notice his eyes is the direct object because os. That goes back to what we were saying earlier. Notice Latin doesn't use his because the context will make it clear. That's what we talked about earlier in terms of possessive adjectives here as well. Turned away his eyes. Then, so tum just means then. It's just an adverb. Now here we have a two-word ablative absolute. How do we know? Because the endings are in the ablative. I can tell you that based on my experience, when I first encountered ablative absolutes, they were a little bit foreign just because I couldn't think of another language that has them, at least the languages I know. But you'll discover with practice, they get easier and easier to understand. And then the context will help you with that. So then, now here we have to kind of, here's the word question and then cause, right? Then after he had been asked why, so literally after he had been questioned the why, so, or what, after he had been questioned the cause of turning away his eyes, but again, that's the context, is that the question sort of wants us to understand that, well, why did Hercules turn away his eyes? So then after he had been questioned about the cause, might be the translation I would go with. He said, so inquit means he said, she said. So this is referring back to Hercules rather, right? So this one could be translated in many ways. This could be, it's not clear based on the context, at least to me, is this going to be the perfect passive, which seems to be. So literally, I hate him, or he is to be hated because he is a friend of wickedness, and also he corrupts everything for the sake of profit. So these first two words are a little bit tricky. Literally is that he is to be hated, or literally I don't like him. You said that more idiomatically. I don't like him. He's odious. I don't like him because he is a friend of ill will or wickedness. I guess that the context here is that many of the gods in the mythology help Hercules, but maybe he doesn't. So I don't like him because he is a friend of wickedness or wicked deeds, malice, and also he corrupts, or rather he has corrupted everything. So this is past tense, I guess. No, this is present tense. And he corrupts everything for the sake of profit. So cause means, in this case, for the sake. Anyway, so this last part's a little bit trickier. You can mess around with your own translation. All right, that was it. That was just a brief lesson this week heading into fall break. There will be no Blackboard discussion on Wednesday, but as always, feel free to email me. Next week, we will move on to chapter 25, and then the week after will be your next test. So, as always, it's a good idea just to preview this chapter in advance of next week's video tutorial, which I'll send you next Sunday, Monday. As you'll see, this is going to be another grammar concept which is somewhat unique to Latin, especially indirect statement, and there'll be some paradigms or patterns that are simply just have to be memorized. All right, enjoy your fall break.